of the study, and we developed ways of making sure they were kept informed of things that happened, but it was really very exciting. But it was, again, that relationship that we built with the schools and the teachers, and then the teachers with the parents. And we offer workshops for the parents as well, that, for all the schools where children were participating.
The fourth R doesn't need parent consent because it's part of the curriculum. You do if you're doing a research study. But because it's part of the curriculum and the school board chose that material to teach, the parents don't have to consent to it. They can take their kids out if they don't want them to learn about substance use for religious reasons or whatever. And for the research studies, we did a lot like what a lot of researchers do. You have pizza parties if you return your consent forms, whether you consent or not. It's just bringing the darn form back. And these are a bit older kids, so it wasn't that tough. We had over 90% consent in the study.
Any concerns by parents after the fact or during the program that you had to field?
I can just say that no, fortunately there's not. I expected, one kid come home and say, hey, we learned about sex today, or whatever they might say could really blow things up fast. It didn't happen. Like many states, Ontario's had pushback because they have a new sex ed curriculum, and it's not really just sex ed, it's all three of those areas, substance use and such. But we now have a very liberal curriculum starting in grade 1, and it's doing very well, but there was a lot of pushback. That wasn't against the fourth R, but against just the curriculum. But I know that educators are a bit timid around parents, and if one parent calls in and says, I don't want my kid learning this stuff, the principal may stop it. And that's always been a concern of mine. It has not happened. There's been discussions, and principals usually say, no, it's part of the curriculum. It's what we're supposed to be teaching them. And that's that. And that's what we want them to do.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, now let's turn to some of the other questions that were voted on and do a few of those. This one's from Mary Polito. This says that it couldn't help being noticed that there was a puppet of color used to depict the perpetrator, with a lighter-skinned puppet depicting the child or the victim. Can you speak to that a little bit? Was that done for a reason, and have you thought about that a little bit?
Actually, we picked puppets to signify all different races in New York City, and if you could see the entire skit, we used the puppets for sometimes that puppet was also, I think it was the father giving a safe touch in another skit. So if you could see all of the skits lined up, we made the puppets. Oh, it was the doctor. All right, the African-American looking puppet was the doctor giving a safe touch, with a needle. So we didn't just have the puppets in one skit. There's many skits, and we made them sort of, most of the puppets that you could see online were white, and we wanted them to reflect the diversity of the New York City children that were in the skits. So they had different roles based on each skit, whether they were giving safe touches or not safe touches.
Thank you. And I have read your curriculum and your stuff, and I also see a careful sensitivity to cultural differences and so on. So thank you for that. The next biggest question has to do with assessment, and the research around some of these programs has mainly been focused on changes of knowledge and changes of attitude. It's nice to see that in Mary's case and in David's case, for some of these programs, you go out more than post, a few weeks, a month, and then David into years. But we're wondering if you've thought about extending these findings to changes in behaviors, and then ultimately how we see decreases in rates of the what we're trying to mitigate, so abuse and violence and so forth? And have you thought about ways to extend your research to show changes in rates? And any of you can talk about it.
We've actually, we have written a grant that would track the children, I mean, through the New York City Public Schools for up to a year, and we are looking, and then, you know, hopefully if we can land an R01, it would be up to 5 years, so we can look and see if there are behavioral changes. We're seeking funding for that right now, but before, I mean, we just finished the grant, with the understanding that the children understand the concepts and the children retain the concepts. So now the goal is to see, will the children practice the concepts? So that's next on our agenda. Because that's right, that's what it's all about. It's all about reducing the rates eventually.
Part of our sample, we did behavioral observations, but it was with actors, because there is no way you can observe kids being abusive, drinking, or having sex. So basically you have to use self-report or you use role play situations. So they went into actor situations with older kids and role played some of this. And that was rated blindly by teachers from another school who didn't know the kids, and to see, they just rated their skills. And that showed that they had a lot more skill. And that was done that was done at the end of the program. Not a year later, at the end of the program. Did they learn the skills? Because if they didn't learn the skills or show them, then you wouldn't see an effect later. And they certainly did, and it was observable by neutral parties. So that was convincing to me. But your issue that was raised here around incidence rates and such, that's the biggie. I know Jeff Temple's following some kids in Texas for years now, and following them across the country when he needs to. So that really is what has to happen for prevention to gain the foothold that interventions typically have, is to show that rates do go down. And that can be done. It just, we have to put our heads together on that.
And Elizabeth, I know you've done some recidivism work and so forth.
Yeah, we've been able to track recidivism. That's always using self-report and arrest and juvenile and criminal arrest data. For the responsible behavior with younger children, as I mentioned in my talk, we do have several measures of kid behavior. One is a validated measure that looks at kid sexual behavior with younger children, peer and as well as peer-on-peer sexual behaviors, both coercive and non-coercive. And in order to collect those data and not be mandated to report when a youth does disclose that he's involved a younger child in sexual behavior or even a peer in sexual behavior, we're going to request a certificate of confidentiality from NIH. And if we get that, then we can collect those behavioral outcomes. And those are the key ultimate outcomes that we need to show change in.
Great, thank you. Another popular question that came across the technology was, can either or all of you speak to any adaptation of these models for use with children with intellectual disabilities or other challenges? Because we know that children with intellectual disabilities are victims to a large degree, and also get bullied and so forth. So what are your thoughts about adapting these curricula for children with disabilities?
I mean, at the NYSPCC, wait, can I just stand up?
Yeah, sure.
I feel weird, this whole half of the room can't see me, sorry. We are very concerned with this being able to be offered for children with disabilities, because we know that they're at the highest rate and they can't tell anyone usually what's going on, and people really don't understand, or they're not communicating it the right way. And we have written a grant that we are right now seeking funding for, to offer Safe Touches to children with disabilities. We've also, since we finished the NIH grant, we also want to get the curriculum translated first into Spanish, and there's also a heavy Orthodox Jewish community in New York City, and they've expressed interest in it. So we're reaching out to their leadership to see what type of changes need to be made and able for them to feel comfortable offering it to their community as well.
Any thoughts from you, David?
My thoughts are our small group program can be delivered in other facilities settings or after school and can be easily adopted to people of different levels. So it doesn't seem to be a challenge because the concepts are not difficult for them, and the skills can be taught and learned. And I concur that those kids would need special attention, special effort to make sure they're protected.
And importantly, those of you who work with children with disabilities, your understanding of their level of ability to integrate these concepts would be most helpful. So working together with you is going to help answer these questions. That's how this works. We learn from you, and then we take these principles and concepts and put them to the test. So please don't be afraid to engage us and ask for those kinds of things. There's a question here, David, to you about the integration within curriculum, and how can you speak to fidelity of that, of the program while being integrated into curriculum? Can you speak to that?
Stand up as well. Fidelity is always an issue. When we were doing the research study, we were able to observe parts of the classes and that and make sure they were delivering it. But the challenge is that teachers may say, I already have a plan to teach X or Y, and so they drop it. Or they don't like to do role playing, so they drop it. And that's an issue with any education aspect, in fact, not just health class. But there's two things. One is health class is the poor child of the education system. Parents don't pay any attention to your phys ed grade, usually. So we're trying to break out health class from phys ed so that they actually pay attention to it. We want the principals to pay more attention to the importance of these issues, because there's research to show that if kids feel safe at school, they do better at school. Very fundamental concept. But it's up to the principal and our local master trainer to make sure that the people are delivering it properly. But it is an ongoing issue. It's very tough to do. I don't think pardon me, it is integrated into the curriculum, but it is part of the curriculum. So they don't do it every day. They may do it on rainy days and go out and kick the ball on the other days. And there's a lot of flexibility built into it that way. They can integrate the boy-girl classes so that they can practice together. There's a lot of flexibility how they do it. We just don't want them cutting out the red parts. There's yellow parts, red parts. You don't mess with the green parts in the program. You can change names, you can change the sports examples, you can change all sorts of things, but you don't start cutting and pasting the rest of it, or it's not the program anymore. Thank you.
Great. There's so many great questions. We probably could go on for a long time, but some of the others that are popping up here, for all of you, specifically, do you teach children to recognize some of the grooming techniques that perpetrators may use to gain trust, such as fondling the hair and so forth, that might be, good or safe touches in the hair, but are actually more grooming behaviors? Where do those kinds of behaviors come into your curriculum and discussion with children or with parents?
We teach aspects of the grooming behaviors all the way from K through the 12th grade in ours, but for the little ones, in fact, I think it was even in one of the skits, it was, if you keep a secret and I can touch you, I'll give you an iPad, something that a little child can understand. The other thing that we teach is how, with the K through 3 group, that even a touch that may feel okay at first, like the tickles or a hug, if it goes on too long, may make them feel uncomfortable. So for the Safe Touches program, we do make the child begin to understand that the adult may do something that initially may feel okay, but when they start thinking about it, or they can't tell their mother or father that if they get that, icky feeling in their stomach, that they have to stop. As it gets older, we give much more, specific examples of grooming and what that looks like. But for the Safe Touches component, it's really, we're dealing with secrecy, we're dealing with gifts, we're dealing with touching, and then we go into, touches between the legs, touches on the chest, and what led up to that is in the skits. So it's, we do cover that in Safe Touches. We cover it in all the curriculums.
David, any kind of coercive sort of behaviors covered in the 4th R, and how do you think about these kinds of things with older kids?
Yes, I don't think we deal with grooming, so to speak, because that's, we're talking more peer-to-peer. What we're trying to teach them is how to be, self-responsible and carry that forward. So, and also it's about monitoring your peers. So if they're talking about what they're going to do or would do or have done, that they know what to say to them, because they're the ones that have to marshal one another and to counteract some of that. So very much so, we do talk about coercive, aggressive activities, usually around drug and alcohol, because that's what gets young women in trouble. If they go to a party and start drinking, they have to know how to keep safe themselves, and the boys have to know how to make sure they don't violate. So those are the topics. That's an easier one for them to break into, and then the sexuality goes from there often.
And then specifically, maybe, Mary, you can start out with this, but everyone, all three of you may have an answer. So let's talk about costs, and let's talk about how we might think about, if you could talk about the cost, maybe to a district or even a school, of being able to deliver your program, Mary. And then what advice would you give a community who wanted to be coordinated in making prevention programs like this available to the community, including schools, how we can use places like our Women's Resource Centers and other centers whose mission is to provide prevention? So what are your thoughts about both the cost and feasibility of the cost, and then the coordination of prevention services in a community?
Well, since it's a 45-minute workshop one time, it's time intensive, and it doesn't take up a lot of the school time, which is one thing that we were really looking at, because we understand all the pressures teachers are under for their, the core curriculum and the testing and everything else that has to go on. Regarding cost, there's an initial cost to be trained in the skits, to get the puppets and the posters. The puppets and the posters are, I'm going to say, if you go all out and you get 2 sets of puppets and 4 posters, it's under $1,000. So that, and then you are well prepared to go into several sets of classrooms all at once. The NYSPCC provides the training, provides a video with every single skit in it, so that people can refresh themselves and go back and look. We have found that the most cost-effective way is not for each school to have to invest in puppets and posters, but to partner with maybe a prevention agency or a child advocacy center or whoever would have the staff that could be trained and then could go into many schools in a district. Because then you have a group of people, and we want to go in and train, like in Greece, we went in and trained 20 people, because if someone's on vacation, if someone's out, you want someone there to be able to do the puppet show and continue the script. So the goal is to go in to train a group of people at once, and then they can form a schedule with the schools, and it's whatever time is allotted. Their salary would be the cost of providing this for all the children. But that's the most economical way to do this, is because then you're able, the reach is great. Like the NYSPCC, we're reaching, thousands of children a year with 2 part-time staff and interns, MSW interns. But because we train them all when they come in, and we have 1 staff member at each section, we're able to reach thousands of children, and that's by far I think the most economical way to go.
David, I know you're going to say it doesn't cost anything, but here we are in the U.S. and we don't have the Canadian school
I wasn't going to say
district.
very similar to what Mary's saying, though. It's the economy of scale. We try to have school boards adopted as opposed to 1 class or 1 school. We can't go down and send a master trainer to train 1 teacher or even 1 school. So we have an online version, much like you might buy software so that you can get rights to use it. If your school is, if your school district, your school board is of a certain size, then you have up to so many uses, and it's much easier because new teachers teach it next year. It includes the training, so it allows you to continually upgrade, and you only have to do it once until the curriculum changes and that. So it's pretty economical, especially after the first year. We have online training as well. It's a little bit more difficult because people like people in the room when they're getting the training. It's tough to stare at a computer for several hours, even though you can do it over a week. But it is available, especially for those who are moved in at the last minute to fill in a maternity leave or something. They can get the training without sending in a new person. To be very practical, what we do is if there's a board that's interested or a teacher, we say get your learning coordinator to talk to our learning coordinator and find out what it is that you require, how big your school board is, and whether you want on-site training. And then we find someone local, one of our master trainers in the region, that goes in and does the training. That's the way it's been working.
Great.
Jenny, can I weigh in on cost for just a second?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Just to back it up a little away from the very practical considerations of cost and implementing in a school or school district, is to also look at what's the cost of abuse when it happens. And so there's a couple of years ago, the good people at the CDC and some other economists estimated that the cost of an incident of child abuse and neglect was $210,000 per victim across the life course of the victim. We've recently completed an analysis of the cost just of child sexual abuse and come up with about $310,000 per victim over the life course of a victim. And so another thing, in addition to people not being able to kind of visualize what would prevention look like of child sexual abuse, I hear from lawmakers, prevention's great, but we don't have the money for it. With sex offending, we imprison people. That's $100,000 a year per kid who gets imprisoned. They may be imprisoned for up to 5 years for a sexual offense. Not all of them are, but they can be. And we also have 19 states that have sex offender civil commitment facilities. Those are $150,000 to $200,000 per person per year, and nobody gets out of those facilities in less than 5 years. So you're looking at $500,000 to $1 million. In Minnesota, people have been in for 25 years at $210,000 per year per person. So we invest enormously after the fact. We invest enormous amounts of money. A recent estimate of juvenile registration and notification, that was a cost benefits estimate, estimated that annually we lose between 10 and 40, they said billion, it seems unbelievable to me, but in any event, because it's not effective, it can't be cost effective, and so all of the money are lost dollars to those kinds of policies. So my wish would be that we could look at the way we already spend money and find the ways that we are spending it poorly and redirect at least some of that into the development, rigorous evaluation, and dissemination of effective prevention programming.
That's a great point, Elizabeth. I'm going to elaborate on that in a second, but I want to take the last question from the audience. I know not everybody is as tech savvy as some others, and you may not have access to slide on, so I want to open the microphone up to one last question from those who may not have gotten onto the technology. So while I wait for someone to step up, I'm going to elaborate on what Elizabeth said, because what she's showing you is how we can craft impact messages in economic terms that resonate with our policymakers. And the art of doing that and the gift of doing that is something that we all need to be more skilled at. And Elizabeth did a great job of articulating that. And one of the things that we want to work on in our Child Maltreatment Solutions Network is how to then garner the right kind of funding for sustainability of these kinds of programs, working with the Department of Human Services for line item budgets for prevention in schools, working to circulate